background, the organizers. Hello, can you hear me, Dr. Sada? I seem to have some interruption.
Yes, Patty, please.
No problem.
All right. Okay. So I think now I'm much audible. Just to give a bit of context to where we have come. I know that in the room we have with us students that are joining us for the certificate program, but we also know that we have friends, colleagues, and practitioners and experts who have religiously joined us for the various conversations and the various webinars that we have held in the context of the Global Compact for Migration. And when I say we, I'm talking about the Migrant Forum in Asia, the Global Research Forum on Diaspora, the Global Research Forum on Diaspora and Transnationalism, I should know that by heart, the Cross-Regional Center for Migrants, and then we are also joined joined for this particular one by the International Institute of Migration and Development, as well as Metropolis Asia Pacific. So you can see that the partnership behind there is quite powerful in terms of the scope and the coverage that these organizations engage in. And my name is Paddy Sianga Knudsen, and I am from the Global Research Forum on Diaspora and Transnationalism, GRFDT. And I will be your moderator for today for this webinar. We just thought that it's a bit good for us to take a bit of a step back and look at Global Compact for Migration, Global Compact for Migration Objective #1 that, you know, aims and calls upon states and different partners to collect and utilize accurate and disaggregated data as a basis for evidence-based policies. And there are a number of areas that are outlined in there. I think instead of us having to go through sort of a very read through of what's important, I think the links are going to be shared in the chat for us to see the various areas. And this is why we have the panel here with us to join us and deliberate on not only where we came from with this particular objective, but also looking a bit to what are the challenges that have happened since the Global Compact for Migration was signed in Morocco in 2018, and also realizing that we are in the midst, in most parts of the world, of a pandemic, whether we're feeling the health impacts or we are feeling the social and economic impacts of it. So trying to understand what that has done to the objectives and or to the pace of implementation of this Global Compact. And as we are also unpacking this objective, I think it's also very important for us to think about the different actors that are involved on the ground in terms of a collection of data, but in terms of the uses for data, in terms of the decisions that affect migrants and their families, as well as communities at large. So I'm going to introduce in a moment our panel. And I will be giving their bios even as, you know, as they will come on to the to present their very first reflections. But before that, just a bit of housekeeping. We do realize that the room is full, and we are all very eager to engage, and therefore we have the chat where you can put some reflections. We ask that the students also feel free to ask any questions and reflections, but that maybe we may just use the chat for that instead of sort of going for the logistical classroom related issues, which we can deal with on the Google Drive. So issues related to your registration and things that are related in particular to the attendance to this Zoom. Zoom links for the attendance will be sent later on. So we can be patient on that. But it would be great for us to engage. We also, I guess, haven't seen each other for some parts of the world. People haven't been able to move and travel to see each other in workshops, conferences, as well as in places that you would regularly meet. So please feel free to say hello to each other as you are exchanging and deliberating on the topic. We ask that you keep your microphones muted, because that's it just allows us to have a smooth transition, but also ask that you can keep your videos on, because it's always nice to have a visual of who we have with us in the room. And with that, let me introduce the panel. Today we have Ms. Sina Smith, who is the Regional Data Curator at the Global Data Service, and she's based in UNHCR's Regional Bureau for Asia and the Pacific in Bangkok, Thailand. And somebody may ask, well, this is the Global Compact for Migration. Why do we have UNHCR? We're yet to find out how those linkages are important. And then we have Ms. Estrella Layom, who is the migration and displacement expert based with UNICEF, and she is the coordinator of the International Data Alliance for Children on the Move, normally known as IDAC. And last but not the least, we have Professor Irudaya Rajan, who is the chairman of the International Institute of Migration and Development. And we're pleased that he can join us to give us his reflection from that perspective. And with that, just checking again that everything is okay on our side. And I wonder if I could already kick off and bring on Estrella. You know, Estrella, even as you joined us, I do realize, first of all, that congratulations are in order since you joined UNICEF, but we also know that you've carried many hats, I think, with your work around the migration space. So, you know, yours is not an unfamiliar face to us. We've known you from the work that you do at the Global Migration and Development Forum, and also just knowing some of the interesting work that you have done around different spaces. And we're glad that you could join us today and really just taking us through and making us understand, you know, the International Data Alliance on Children on the Move, why this emphasis, and particularly linked to when we talk about the use of disaggregated data and what that looks like. So, you know, I wondered if you could already kind of dive us into looking at the importance of disaggregation and the link to vulnerability when we talk about children on the move. And also, you know, what are we talking about in terms of the data gaps, you know, here, and the challenges that you foresee. So over to you, the floor is yours, Estrella.
Thank you very much, Patty. Can you hear me? Well, first, let me begin by greeting everyone who is participating in this series. I believe it's on the second year of the GCM. Congratulations to the organizers, to the Global Research Forum, and Migrant Forum in Asia, and other members of the consortium. I think you're doing a great job, especially taking advantage of the opportunity presented by the pandemic, you know, to meet online and to continue to share experiences and lessons learned from the pandemic, and continue the cause of really advocating for the protection of migrants the world over. So this is really my first engagement with you, and I'm very excited and thankful for this opportunity. So yeah, as you said, I've worn several hats, but let me begin with a UNICEF hat, and the hat is the international coordinator of this international alliance, which was just actually established in March 2020, so just before the pandemic set in. We're looking at GCM Objective 1, which is collecting and utilizing accurate and disaggregated data. So let's recall our departure point, the main departure point, which is the 2030 agenda. And, you know, the SDG indicators require that data, in order to deliver on the commitments under the SDGs, should be disaggregated where relevant by income, sex, age, race, ethnicity, migratory status, disability, and geographic location or other characteristics. So it's very strong entry point why we need to aggregate for why we need to disaggregate. And especially for migrants, the reason is to ensure that no migrant is left behind. And that means it is the data, it's the evidence base that will allow us to understand migrants' characteristics across sectors to inform targeted policy. And also to identify in what contexts migrants are agents for sustainable development, to increase the chances to effectively and sustainably meet the sustainable development goals, to address the relative needs of host communities, to improve resource allocation and efficiency, to address important gaps in migration data and research, for example, on integration, and to comply with international law duties, especially under international human rights law, and as well to provide a baseline for other international frameworks. So that's the big picture. But among the migrants, there is a subgroup that these are the children who are displaced, and migrant children who are facing greater vulnerabilities. And this is the reason why we need to disaggregate data so that we can better understand their vulnerabilities. And we need to secure their rights and to monitor the commitments under the GCM and the SDG achievement. So as you know, UNICEF, the UN Convention on Children, which was adopted and opened for signature by the General Assembly in 1989, provides for the civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights for all children. And it explains how adults and governments must work together to make sure that these children enjoy their rights that they are entitled to. And then we have a GCM Objective, Objective 1, and we also have GCR references highlighting the importance of data and evidence to protect the refugee children. So we have strong legal frameworks. In fact, we're looking at over like 100 years of protection, increasing protection, and towards the last 10 years with an emphasis on the need for data and evidence base. Now, in terms of the actual or current outlook on children, migrant and displaced children, we really have the general scarcity and limitations of available data. There is general scarcity across the world. Let me cite some statistics. 4 in 10 countries with data on refugees do not provide reliable data on age. Almost 9 in 10 countries and territories with conflict-related internally displaced persons do not disaggregate also data by age. And 3 in 10 countries and territories do not have age disaggregated migrant stock data. So there is, these numbers tell us that the huge gaps that exist, which obscure some of the basic information about children on the move. However, whatever limited information we have are crucial for informed decision making, and this is what has been guiding our policymakers and those who design the programs on the ground. Let me just cite some 2 to 3 facts to tease out these data gaps on migrant and displaced children. Number 1, migrant children is not a small population globally. So in 2020, there were 281 million international migrants, and that's up from 153 in 1990. Among them were 36 million children, so living outside their country of birth. And this figure is the largest that has ever been recorded. So in short, 1 in 8 migrants is a child, and children account for 13% of all international migrants. Fact number 2, 2 in 5 persons living in forced displacement are children. So the number of children that have been displaced either internally or internationally as a consequence of conflict or violence or other violations, or even by the pandemic, has steadily increased over the last 10 years, doubling from 17.4 million in 2010. And this trend does not show any signs of slowing down. By the end of 2020, there were twice as many children internally displaced by violence and conflict within their own borders than there were child refugees. And we also know that crisis and conflict drive more children to travel alone. So for example, in 2020, an alarming number of children traveled unaccompanied. In Europe, there were 14,000 such recorded children, and they are separated among asylum seekers and at the US border with Mexico. Yeah, we have actually just last week or this week, a recent issue of a migration policy practice that focuses on children in the current Central America, Mexico, United States context, which identifies critical blind spots for child-related migration data. So these are just some of the quick facts about the general statistics on children on the move, and children on the move that are boys and girls who have been displaced or who do not live in their country of birth, and are either also displaced internally and stay within the national borders but have left their home. Yeah, and we also know that COVID-19 has exacerbated already existing inequalities before the pandemic. And in March or April this year, IDAC has actually released a report. And it's a gendered report, gendered risks and vulnerabilities that boys and girls face because of the pandemic. And there is emerging evidence that indeed the experiences of boys and girls on the move vary, and some of them become more prone to disproportionate burdens of care, economic shocks, and working children. Their needs, basic needs, are largely unmet because they were already suffering from deprivations before the pandemic struck. And in terms of education, also the impact has been massive, because many of these migrant and displaced children, they do not have access to technology. Some of them not even access to electricity that would allow them to continue studying. So we have this evidence that's growing. We know that there are large data gaps. And this is the reason why the International Data Alliance for Children on the Move was established in 2020, as I said. It is actually an outcome of a thematic workshop that was organized by Morocco in Rabat in March 2019, so immediately after the adoption of the GCM. So you can say that in that sense, the IDAC is an outcome of the GCM adoption of member states, although the main departure point, as I said, is this 2030 agenda, making sure that no one is left behind. And through this alliance, we would like to bring together all the concerned actors working on data collection, sharing, analysis, and use, as well as the policymakers and programmers that are working with children on the move, on the ground, and also members of the civil society, the private sector, and of course the member states themselves, who are responsible for the delivery of the 2030 commitment to leave no one behind. So maybe Patty, I will stop there, because I can talk more about the many other activities of the IDAC later. Yeah, so just perhaps as a background. Over to you, thank you.
An absolutely useful background, Estrella. Thank you for that. And I think the important linkages to the SDG 2030 agenda remains very critical. And also in terms of understanding the fact that if we do not understand, if we do not have a good picture of who is in the populations, we may end up leaving people behind. And I think this is the emphasis that you've just brought out, looking at the aspect of children on the move. Thank you for sharing those deliberations. I wonder that if I could come back to you a bit later to talk a little bit more about, you talked about the role of sort of looking at vulnerabilities. And then there we understand in terms of methodology, we would be looking at qualitative data. So we're also talking about the various partnerships and actors that you have on the ground to feed into this system. So how does that particular mechanism work to make sure that information is collected, but that there is also a platform for some peer learning and cross-sharing between countries as they try to understand the important vulnerabilities, and in shaping migration policies that address these vulnerabilities. I was also just thinking how interesting the linkage that you have made to IDAC really, resulting from a global effort, but then, really spinning off a bigger framework around the SDGs. I think that's an important point to bring across. And then I think we can come back to you. And as you take a reflection on that, I wonder if I can bring Professor Rajan onto, and as you are turning on your mic and your video, Professor Rajan, I think we cannot see you right now. So I will go ahead and just introduce Professor Rajan, who is a former professor at the Center for Development Studies. He's based in Kerala and and is currently the chair of the Global Knowledge Partnership on Migration and Development, which is a World Bank working group on internal migration and urbanization. And he has, we know him as being part of these expert committee groups to advise the government of Kerala. So if just a search on Professor Rajan on YouTube and Kerala, I think they almost become synonymous in terms of the kind of information that the center that he chairs, which is the International Institute of Migration and Development, has brought out in terms of information related to impact of COVID on migrants. So we're very happy to have you here. I still don't see him in the room. Just checking, Rakesh, do we have a visual, or is it just on my side that I cannot spot Professor Rajan yet? Just going on to talk maybe a little bit about the center. It's a center for academic research that's devoted to all aspects of international migration, and they have actually been very instrumental in sort of advancing this new thinking around migration, and particularly looking at India's research network on migration and regroup. So we are also very glad to have them as a partner on this certificate program that looks at that's covering the Global Compact on migration.
Professor Rajan has come.
Sahul?
Sir, I think, did you hear the question that I asked?
No, I didn't get the question because there was some problem with my thing. Can you repeat that? I'll speak.
Just where is coming. She has got some problem.
Hello, Professor Rajan, are you
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I can hear you. Please.
there? Okay. Sorry about that. Can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Okay, and
There
we
was some
have
confusion. Yeah.
great. That's fine. Well, Professor Rajan, we can dive straight into it. Could you just run us through sort of how, because we know that the work that you have done at the Institute, has covered a lot of COVID-related research. So really looking at this impact that it has had on migrants, and both looking at the internal migration, but also looking at international migration. So maybe just zooming in a bit more on international migration, it would be great for us to hear from you how most of the countries, and particularly looking at India, in your way and the way you've put it, have sort of had limitations and challenges, in having meaningful programs to support COVID-related responses, and linking that to the aspect of the lack of proper data on migration. Professor Rajan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Paddy. I think thank you all the participants and the team. I think I just wanted to start with that. I think somehow migration is not getting the proper place it required in the policy making. I think that is where the whole problem we are talking about, because to get the correct data, we have to mainstream migration into development, which is not happening at the country level, which is not happening even at the global level. I think the witness was the COVID-19 period. So I think that's something I would like to elaborate on that. Second thing, even the data what you have right now, if you go to the, for example, let me take the case of India, for example. The government of India produces some data on how many Indians are in 180 countries. But these are not even estimates. I call them guesstimates. This is just, the one ambassador from one country telling how many Indians are there. They give you some number, 5,000. I think this is not the way to look at the migration numbers in the context of the goals which you are talking about, creating database on migration by migration by disaggregation, which countries we have, how many women are there, as you heard already, how many people are affected, like children moving, how many people even affected because of somebody's migration, like we talk about somebody's migrating but the children left behind, wives left behind, parents left behind. We all had problem during COVID-19. I think that the important problem what we are facing is that the policy makers are not taking much interest on migration database. And that is also reflected. For example, the COVID-19, when you look at it very carefully, COVID-19 is not a migration crisis. I think I wanted this point to be, I'm telling to everybody, and I want to repeat that to this audience also. Basically, it is a health crisis. We converted into the migration crisis because of the lockdown. That means even the lockdown planning was never considered migrants are existing in India. Our lockdown was only 4 hours time. That's why we call them stranded migrants. People were walking in the road. Even some people were dying on the places. So I think that when we talk about lockdown itself, we have no understanding on what is the volume of migration, both internally and internationally. I think that is where we have failed. And second thing is that, look at the international migration. Many of the countries were not even aware how many people returned from which countries. See, for example, countries were started preparing them after the lockdown. For example, India, we had a special called Vande Bharat flights. We don't know where to send the flight because we have no idea on the migration corridor, where we have migrants, so we have basically the COVID-19 exposed the vulnerability of the deficient database existing, I would put globally. But India, I can talk hours and hours, but India is very important. The second point I would like to make on this context is that even government wanted to allow people to come in, return migrants, their flights started coming in. Many states in India said we don't want them because we also treated them as some type of COVID carriers. The flight coming from Dubai to Trivandrum or Kerala, India, we say it is not the flight. It is basically COVID people are coming in and they have been treated very badly because we never realized how much they were producing remittances to improve the household economy. We all forget about them. So they were, prior to COVID-19, they were heroes. People will go to airport and receive them. And during COVID period, when they came, there is nobody was there. They were become heroes to zeros because we are not able to understand the contribution of migrants and migrants in the economy because we don't have database on that. I think that is something, second point I would like to make. The third point, which is also important, we produce, the institute where now I am affiliated, we produce what is called the migration surveys for last 20 years. And we were done for Kerala state for the last 20 years. And we also replicated in some other states in India. But look at Kerala. Kerala had a very clear data on immigrants by countries where they are located. Dubai, how many are there? We had some database on countries, how many women, what are their qualifications, which are the districts they are, went from Kerala. So this idea was very clearly there. That is why Kerala is the only state in India went to the government of India saying that we know 300,000 people will come. We want to welcome them. No other state were not even going to either to the government to tell them how many are going to come. I think that itself indicated our weakness. I think that has to be rectified by only through debates and also convincing the policy maker to collect. I don't think reliable data might take another 10, 15 years. At least a reasonably good data, because if you don't have data, I don't think you can talk about what is called the facilitating legal and safe migration. You cannot facilitate. Any policy framework, you need numbers. We don't have numbers. That's why I want to conclude. Maybe you can ask me a few questions. I want to conclude saying that India, we always talk about non-resident Indians. We are all very proud of non-resident Indians. NRI means non-resident Indians. I always make a joke, and which is very important, with a joke as well as a serious comment is, NRI means for me, not required Indians. Even we don't collect data on them. We know in this country today in this country, we know how many chappals are exported, how many cars exported. We know every export done, every day you get your data. Are we not able to do that type of database for the migrants who are leaving either for work, either for visit, either for studying? We are not able to produce. I think it is a very, very bad situation. I hope that the database in many countries who are sitting here listening to the people, you should look at in your own country back. What we know about migrants in our country, in my situation, my locality, my state. I think if you look at it and you will come back with the answer, zero. Zero. Paddy, can you hear us?
Professor Rajan? Professor Rajan?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Sincere apologies for the interruption. It seems when it rains, the internet, something happens to the cables. I'm yet to understand the technology behind that. But thank you very much for sharing those reflections, and we'll bring you back a bit more to understand the role of local researchers. I think I quite like the emphasis that you have made in terms of looking at not leaving for return migration particularly, that the onus remains and the responsibilities remains back home in terms of how we register people leaving the territory, but also all the way to consular services and how they are registering migrants, and so that they could know how to then be able to support. So, you sort of need this various sources of data. And I think that that remains quite important. So we would like to hear a little bit from you in terms of the work that you are doing at the Institute to understand a bit more of how the disaggregation can be improved. Just let's bring on Sina. And Sina, I think, just to introduce Sina to everyone, Sina is, like I mentioned before, she's the regional data curator, and she's at the Global Data Center in UNHCR, based in Bangkok. And part of her role there is to provide technical support on data analysis, looking at issues that are related to statistics and methodology. And also, I was keenly interested to look at also on a personal front that she's a PhD holder who particularly has focused a lot on household surveys and and either microdata to map out sort of income inequalities. And when we talk about vulnerabilities, when we're talking about the SDGs, essentially it's about us reducing these inequalities. So I think your experience here, your professional experience, as well as the role that you're playing on UNHCR remain important for us to understand a bit more. Sina, do you just want to walk us through what the so-called UNHCR's Microdata Library is? And I say it in that way because I hadn't heard much about it, but I think in the world of understanding the level of disaggregation that we need, I think that remains an important work. And we just wanted to get a sense, this library that UNHCR has, how do you see it contributing to the sharing of data and information? And here we're looking particularly at refugees and also, of course, other forcibly displaced populations, and how you use, that information. And not to worry to the audience with us, we will be, Sina will be sharing a bit more information in terms of links. And I think as well, we have a screen to share a little bit later on to understand the Microdata Library. Sina, over to you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Paddy, for this very kind introduction. And also thank you very much for organizing this panel. I'm very happy to be here and to talk on behalf of UNHCR and the team that I'm with. And thanks so much for all the participants and also the other panelists. It was very interesting start to the panel. So I look forward to answering any questions that you might have. And I hope you find some new information on what you haven't heard about yet. So let me share my screen because I thought we could do this a little bit more interactively, and I can walk you through the UNHCR's Microdata Library, which, as Paddy already said, is at the heart of trying to make data more accessible, not just internally, which we have another library for, but most importantly externally, and to other stakeholders and researchers and others that are interested in moving the agenda on evidence-based policymaking on forced displacement. So I think here it links very much and very well to the other presentations. And let me share my screen with you. 1 second. That this is always the moment where things can go wrong. So please bear with me.
That should be okay, and it's on its way.
So let me start. Super, you should be able to see my screen now, is that correct? Perfect. So as we have already touched upon briefly in the beginning, and as I'm sure you're all aware of, the situation at UNHCR is not different than at other organizations and not globally either. So UNHCR does collect a vast amount of data, and that is great, but most generally archiving is not very systematic. We have the problem that a lot of data collection efforts are done on the local level, so at the operational level, at the regional bureaus, but there's no overview on what kind of data is available, neither internally nor externally, even more importantly. And more importantly, also sharing is done on an ad hoc basis. And that also means not just internally within UNHCR, but more importantly, again, also with researchers, with other international organizations, UN agencies, and so on and so forth. So this is really where the Microdata Library comes in and why this was established. And just to show you why this is one of the efforts to share and make data more available, and why this is needed is, as I already mentioned, sometimes data can even be forgotten. It can be that different partners have worked on similar exercises, similar data collection efforts, without knowing that the other activity even existed. It can also be that if we want to share data, it's actually not compatible with data protection policies. It's not possible to actually share the data in line with the policy. So here also the Microdata Library can help us. And also, again, it's very difficult for you and for others to know what kind of data does UNHCR actually collect, and how can we work together on moving the agenda towards evidence-based policymaking forward. And I think in the past we have seen also many risks, or we have seen many duplications of data collection efforts, which again also there's a risk, a financial risk, and so on and so forth. So that's why the data curation project, which I'm a team member of, was established, and it's part of the Global Data Service, as Patty already mentioned, and funded by the Joint Data Center. It's an initiative by the World Bank and UNHCR, so you might have heard about it, might have come across about it. And it's really to make the UNHCR's operational data available to the public, and also to you if you're interested in working with it. This is to show you that what I mentioned briefly before is that within UNHCR, we also have a system of making data available internally, which is called Riddle. And this is the first step for us. But then, of course, we are very interested in making most of the data where it's possible also available to the public. And for that, we, of course, need to make sure that the data follows certain standards, is anonymized, and we cannot identify anyone. After all, we're looking at very vulnerable populations, and this is, of course, a high concern for us. So, as I said, the Microdata Library has over 300 data sets at the moment. So feel free to go on it, have a look. Most of it, or all of it, of course, is anonymized. We also provide introductions to the data, which is the so-called metadata. So you can read about what was the purpose of the study, what was the sampling, what was the data collection mode, all these details that might help you to know whether this could be interesting for you or not. And then we make the data available either via a so-called licensed use. So there you have to request the data, and we get that request, and then you have to provide us with a brief statement on why you think it would be interesting for you to work with the data, and then we grant you access to the data. Some data sets are also just available for the public without requesting it. And as I said, so the library hosts many different data sets, so all of it microdata, operational data, so household surveys, individual level surveys, could be monitoring evaluations, program evaluations, different things on, of course, forcibly displaced populations. And we are also actually hosting data from other organizations. So it's not just UNHCR data, but we're trying also to work with the World Bank and other organizations, GIPS and so on, to make their data also available on UNHCR's Microdata Library. Just to give you an idea of what's in there and which countries and regions we have represented. So a lot of the data comes from Africa, but most of the regions are represented. And as you can see, the surveys and the microdata covers different topics. On socioeconomic surveys, could be food security surveys, could be a cash assistance program monitoring, different surveys with different topics. So just to bring to your attention that please go ahead and have a look at the webpage. Feel free to request any data that you're interested in. And yeah, I'll make sure to approve your request if it has a good purpose. And otherwise, it's just also very much, I just very much wanted to highlight that I hope in the future we'll work together to contribute to making more data available, making it more easily discoverable for analysis and research. So I think that's very much the main goal of the Microdata Library, and it's a small step, but hopefully in the right direction. And please feel free to ask me any questions, and thank you again very much for participating and for the panel. Thanks.
Ina, thank you for this. And I see already questions being raised in terms of if they can have this resource shared with them, the PowerPoint presentation, and we're very happy to pass that on to the Google Classroom. But then for those who are joining us otherwise, I think we could try and find a way for us to share that resource. I think it was really interesting understanding what that process is and the level of detail that it goes to in terms of the scope that it covers, but I think also in terms of the partnerships. I do see that hands are being raised, and we will have a moment for us to do a Q&A in a moment. If you could just allow me maybe 1 more minute, 2 more minutes to just go back with one more round of questions to our panelists, and then I will open the floor for half an hour. Will be open for you to just go ahead and speak out your questions as concise as possible. And for those who are probably maybe busy behind your workspace or have a burning question and you don't want to forget it, please feel free to just post it in the chat room, and our panelists will be very happy to share it when we go for the Q&A session. So thanks again, Sina, for sharing that. And I think as you come back, what is sort of interesting for us is understanding sort of the use of the data that you provide also for programming. Have you sort of seen some evidence that has come out from the other end, countries, interest groups, as well as, other partners that are kind of, following on and using the data for decision making, whether it's at the program level or we're talking about the strategic level, or even also at the technical level in terms of providing services to refugees, but also looking at people that are forcibly displaced. So if I may, I will Professor Rajan, I will just ask for your indulgence. I know you have to rush through for a meeting. Can I ask Professor Rajan to come on? And then there's a couple of people I would also like to come on. So thank you for the hands being raised. Professor Rajan, would you just like to come back and give us again some of your reflections? Just opening up and unpacking this this objective that countries and partners gathered for in 2018. Talking about disaggregating data, collecting data, and how we should be using it for evidence-based policy, and how far you sort of think we've come along in terms of that objective, and what we should be doing more, because I do know that you would have to leave us shortly for a meeting. So I would like to get your reflections. Professor Rajan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Paddy. I think what I said, I would like to restart a few points. One is that today, if you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, many of the indicators related to migration is still vacant in many countries. They have no data on migration costs. They have no data on many things still vacant, and it's also true for even our country. So I think there should be a mechanism at the national level, but that is not happening right now, because India, I'm not sure that India will ever be able to collect data for all the states. So we should probably move from what is called that top-down approach. We have to replace with the bottom-up approach. I think the states should start. Every state started doing something, then it will reach to the Indian level. If you are expecting, say, Nigeria to collect data, probably it may not be possible. So maybe we have to start with the commune. We have to start with maybe the local level to start up. I think that is what we have shown through our database during the COVID-19, because that is why Kerala state was known during the COVID-19 management, because we get some reasonably good data on how many people are coming to our state from other part of India, internal migrants, and how many are likely to come back. So we had a reasonably good database generated in Kerala. Now it is being replicated in other states. So I think the best strategy for many countries, probably I don't think we'll be able to get the country level data. Once you get the minimum data, start with the data, the database. Once you get the number, then only we can talk about migration corridor, we can talk about characteristics. If you don't know how many are going, then how do you know how many human are going? And how many students are going? We don't know. For example, students were stranded in many countries, Indian students. And we know they had all very troubles because many of them were used to go and work and earn money and study. Everything was closed. And some of the students were even starving in many developed countries, so-called developed countries. So I think partly because of that, either the local governments are taking interest because the migration is somehow get into the politics of the people. I think the politics are taking much more. That is why I think sometimes when you say everybody want to know who is coming to India, we are not interested who is going out of India. I think there is also what is called the global politics on migration. I think that also has to be, maybe discussed at some point in time, because if you take the earlier elections in United States of America, they talk about America first. America first is basically, like you have local policies. So automatically somehow they want to, disregard the migrant. That's why they don't collect the data. So I think two things we should do as a researcher, as a policymaker. We have to bring migrants into the mainstream. Today, when you talk about labor force, in many countries, they talk about labor force of the local. What will the labor force coming from other states? They never talk about labor force planning. I think that is important. So we should talk about labor force. What is going to happen to many countries if people are coming in? And also, another important point, which I would like to say, then probably I'll stop there, is that every country is treating migrants as enemies. That is why we are not collecting data. I think we have to convert at least all of the people who are listening, that 255 people. We have to see that, we have to say that migrants are partners in development. If the UAE government thinks Indians and South Asian coming there, Indians, Bangladeshis, Pakistani coming to UAE, they are partners in development. They will do very well on collecting data, every country. So now what happened, we are treating as they are coming to take our jobs. We are always criticizing migrants. Anything we are talking about migrants. I think that attitude has to change, and we have to see to it that we have to treat them as partners in development. Then automatically we will collect data. I would like to say that earlier we were talking about mainstreaming gender into development. I think we have done a little bit now. I think we should start talking about mainstreaming migrants, migration into development. I think we should start that in a very serious way. Then we will get database, disaggregation, migration corridor, return migrants. You will get many database which will be useful for the future. Thank you.
I still have to get used to the mute button. Thank you so much, Professor Rajan, for sharing those reflections. And I think, your points are very critical in terms of also a mindset change. If you're looking at somebody as a partner, then you are actually very interested in the features and the characteristics of this partner and everything else that comes with it. And I think we've learned that story from how migrants have been looked at as sort of the cash cow, to really understanding what are the needs and what goes into providing a prevailing environment for them to provide the cash that countries are after, both as host and home and in their homelands. So I think you've raised some very critical points there, and thank you very much. I'm sure there are some questions. Maybe you can still hang around and see in the chat box. If you still have a moment, we would ask you to come on. But I think you've also made some very interesting reflections, and I was just looking back again, looking at the Global Compact for Migration and the setting of it. It actually does have certain principles. And one of them is that we need to have a whole of society approach. So, how are we really using data that's coming from the migrants? And as a researcher that works around migration, I mean, often because of cutting corners and budgets, you're told, yes, you could go ahead and you do a bit of reading, but then there's no time to to speak to migrants. Or no, because we have to go through the ethics committee and it's very complicated. So we'll just cut it short and call it a desk analysis. And we end up having piles and piles of reports that don't have the impact that we're looking for, because we haven't spoken to the migrants to understand what their journey is like, to understand the different vulnerabilities that are there, so that the policy can really be informed by these very micro but very essential details. So thank you also for bringing in that aspect in terms of the mind shift change, but also in terms of how we can really have include the migrants as part of our data collection and as partners in creating data sets. In the interest of time, Estrella, can we just have you back for about 2 minutes or so before we open the floor, because the hands keep on coming up. So, you know, I think colleagues in the room are really interested to hear. Just thinking, you know, I was thinking, Estrella, in terms of, you know, we've had with the Global Compact for Migration and zooming back to that, there's been some very interesting developments around the reviews that have taken place at different stages. So these regional reviews, the Africa review just ended in August, and sort of thinking about champion countries, you know, implementation reviews and plans, and regions were coming together to give reports of what they have done. But of course, we know that COVID was a very big interrupter of many things that were happening around that. So I wanted to just, you know, find out from you, and connect it then to your work around IDAC. You know, what can then, and you can bring in here also looking at the, you know, the UN Migration Network and donor communities, how do they then begin to look at IDAC as the source of, okay, this is where the information is important, not just to feed in, but it should also come out that it's used for policy making. So how do we ensure that kind of cycle? So the linkage between the GCM, the SDGs, and then back again to where implementation is taking place, which is at that national level. You know, how do we bring around that kind of visibility for actors, and in terms of also talking about partnerships? Over to you, Esther.
Thank you, Patty. And wow, I wish I had more time than 2 minutes because I was hoping I could share more about the work of IDAC. Okay, let me just say to your question about the Regional Migration Review Forum and the lead up to the IMRF. I believe that there are already some reports from the regional reviews, particularly the European RMRF and then the Latin American. Yeah, so from IDAC, we have not yet engaged with the network per se. You will find information on the knowledge hub of the network about IDAC, the website, but we still have to establish a strong bridge towards the IMRF and in the lead up to that. And I think that what I took note from the roundtable concept papers and the reports that are available, that all these references are available in the network website, is that there is a recognition in all these reviews about the need for improved data, better data, but there is still an uneven attention to how much effort will be required to really take into account the requirements or the needs and address the vulnerabilities of migrant and displaced children. So again, speaking on behalf of the children on the move. So we have to continue our advocacy, and that's what the IDAC is for, to really generate awareness about this urgent need, because otherwise we cannot leave a certain subgroup of the population of migrants in our policy making and program design, and that should be central to the agenda of the IMRF going forward. So give us time. In the next few months, we will try to build that bridge. But if you spare me 1 more minute, Patty, I just want to emphasize that, because I was actually excited by what Professor Rajan said, but he has no time, and we don't have time to engage in a conversation. But he mentioned certain points that I would like to respond. Number one, that indeed the SDG scorecards of countries are many vacant. So this is why we want through IDAC to build capacities of national governments in terms of collecting their data or looking at the data systems for children on the move. And we do that by bringing together different expertise. So we have member states who are leading the way, who have done good initiatives from the global south to the global north. We have about 18 member states now. And then we have NGOs like Save the Children, like IDMC, the Internally Displaced Monitoring Center. And then we have think tanks and academics. For example, Southampton University, who are doing state-of-the-art, approaches on data collection. So they do geospatial, they use geospatial technologies, they use predictive analytics to try to capture data on children on the move. Because as I said earlier, there is general scarcity on data about these vulnerable migrant and displaced children. And the foundational data sets the governments have are the censuses and surveys that normally take place between 5 and 10 years. It's mandatory for them to do 10-year census, but you can just imagine that during this 10-year period, so many things can happen. And you've seen that even if governments are willing to do surveys like in 2020 and 2021, because of the global lockdown, they could not do that. So again, that's affecting the way we collect and we analyze our data. So who comes in? Who can come in to supplement, complement, and fill in the gaps? The civil society, Professor Rajan mentioned, local researchers, right? So you can use those who are working on the ground, in the camps, even the local population. Be vigilant about the citizen-generated data. We can do interviews, we can do use mobile technology. So there are many innovative approaches that will complement and supplement what the government established systems have. And that's the spirit of that we are trying to promote in IDAC, that we bring together, pull the resources together, the different actors that are involved at the nexus of migration, displacement, children, and data. And then you share your expertise, lessons learned. Sina mentioned this Microdata Library. That's one of the good practices that we would like to highlight through this platform of the IDAC. And UNHCR is, in fact, one of the secretariats of the Alliance, together with UNICEF as the chair, and then OECD, Eurostat, and IOM. So you can see these are the big players in migration and displacement. And I think I'd like to highlight that as an important point, because that shows you the potential of this alliance to really make some difference going forward. And we really hope that more member states will join us. Right now, we only have 18. And more non-state actors will also jump on, especially the private sector, because they are the ones who have the money, who have the technology. Because ultimately, we will have to capitalize on the resources available and the political investment that is now seemingly increasing, these days. So over to you, Paddy. Thanks.
Estrella, that's absolutely fine. I think we still have we're very good for time. I think some very interesting reflections there that you have brought out, and also for our students. I think for those who are working around data science and data analysts, it's a very exciting conversation, because there's so much in terms of the respect for the profession that comes out in terms of delivering, and putting together the different kinds of information, but also the appreciation in terms of the time that it takes for setup. But I like how you roped in also the partnership of the civil society organizations, which in most cases are not just kind of doing the advocacy work, but are actually providing services to migrants and to people on the move. So and how they are a very important part of such platforms. Hands are being raised. Sina, can I give you 2 minutes to just come back to us on the question that we raised? And here, I think I'm also borrowing a bit from when I had seen the reflection around the question that what you would like to share with us today. I sort of saw this description that talks about data being the new oil, isn't it? And kind of point to us a bit about how this has been used. How the space has been used then to improve. Is there a practical space that you could talk to at a national level, or or sort of, maybe within interventions within UNHCR or within other partners as well, where we can actually see a clear demonstration of the use of the data?
Yes, thank you so much for that question. And I think it's very important because it shows also, as you said, why it could be the new oil and why it is so crucial moving forward. So I think what we have seen, since it's fairly a new project, we have seen a lot of engagement from academia, from researchers, which is great because they have the expertise and can bring their knowledge and analysis to UNHCR and also help with programming and things like that due to their findings, for example. And I think one of the examples that you might have heard about, because I think it's publicized quite widely, because it's a great example of the usage of the data, is from Lebanon, where researchers have pulled different data sources together. So on one side, registration data from UNHCR, but also survey data and also cache-based survey data. So from the program monitoring that UNHCR does. And what they have been doing in the analysis is to find more evidence on what kind of variables and what kind of characteristics actually are important to refugees, food security, and also economic vulnerability. And then as a result, this has directly also fed into the cash-based assistance program. So I think this is a great example of how academia, UNHCR, and other organizations can work together and hopefully also utilize the data that's there with additional data sources to actually make an impact in that regards.
Thank you for sharing that, Sina, and I'm sure there'll be more questions coming up. So, we've reached the point of the Q&A, and in our space here in the Q&A, we like to hear people's voices, and I can see some hands up. But just before I ask you to speak, I would like to ask Professor Binod Kadria, who's joining us and who's also the president of GRFDT. As you come on, sir, just to share some reflections. I'm not sure whether there was also a question there, but I was actually going to call you up for some reflections from your side in terms of the discussion that we have on hand here on the GCM Objective #1. Professor Binod, over to you. Professor Kadri, I think you need to unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes, okay. Yes, we can. Please go ahead.
Thank you for allowing me to budge in. I should say this is inspired by the 3 brilliant presentations to make the maiden, match that we have today as objective #1. I will be very brief because I know that there are many hands, and then we'd also like to get responses from the speakers themselves. I think I have just three brief comments to make. What do we make out of these presentations? These presentations tell us the gaps. They also tell us the opportunities and the challenges that lie ahead. So from that point of view, I can think of some of the points that are very, very important, because this forum is slightly different from policymakers as well as NGOs. It is a certificate course where we need to try to understand what our role would be once we complete the understanding of the 23 objectives at the end of the course. So the first course, as Estella has presented us with the focused presentation on the children on the move. That's an extremely important objective, a sub-objective, I should say, a subgroup of migrants that need to be talked about and which are neglected so far. But at the same time, we need to understand how children move. Do they move on themselves, by themselves, or they move with adults? They move with parents, with friends, with other people. And that gives us an opportunity to look at that complementarity and try to understand even adult migration from that data. So that is where I would, urge upon our participants here to look for, possibilities which are outside the stereotypes. So that I think is something very important. So far as my friend Irudaya Rajan has made some certain points are very, very important. He also mentioned about the Indian diaspora estimates that have been going around for last 20 years or so on. It started with 20 million and then now they call it 32 million and so on. And he said that it is guesstimates rather than estimates. And that's where I tend to think that, it is better not to have data rather than having wrong data. The wrong data can misguide us, whereas if there are no data, then we will strive to collect the data. Many countries do not share their data, the sovereignty issues and others. So we do not have one size fits all. And that's, I think, very important. And I'm reminded of the cliche that, they say there are three kinds of lies, lies, damn lies, and statistics. So that is where we need to be very, very cautious and careful whether we are falling into the trap of lies, and when it is international, global, politics or political economy playing its role, and then there is all likelihood that we may fall into that trap. I remember my friend, the very renowned migration scholar Stephen Castles had said, look, Vinod, this is an area where there is a lot of dishonesty. Let us face it, the countries are not, putting their cards on the table. They are just playing, against each other. That I think we need to understand. And from that point of view, in fact, the global South is very vulnerable. It's not a level playing field. And I have shared my views on the use of multilateralism. Multilateralism is not a level playing field. Perhaps bilateralism or even unilateralism would provide us a way ahead in collecting data, utilizing data, sharing data, and so on. So that I think is very important and in terms of understanding. Finally, Sina's presentation is extremely important in terms of an effort to collect microdata. The microdata library is very important.
Professor Kadri, I think we lost your audio. Just unmute. I think you still need to unmute.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, now you're back.
Last point I was making was that, Sina's point about collecting data, microdata are very, very important. When we look at aggregate data, we lose the essence, we lose the picture, we lose the details. That I think is extremely, extremely important. We do not collect data at that level. I had made this point that we have just missed a great opportunity of the pandemic in collecting data. Vaccination point. Vaccination is going to cover the entire population of the world. And that's where we could have collected this data. I pointed this out for drawing the attention of the Indian government, which was, going into census this year, and at the same time going to cover a large part of the global population. So that was an opportunity, and I think we still, large population are still not vaccinated, and that's where we can put our minds together in terms of understanding this. Having said that, I would say, what is our role? The role of this body, is to educate the policymakers and educate the politicians, not to just finger pointing and saying that you are not doing this, you are not doing this. That we have come a long way. We have to tell them how to do what we want them to do. And that's where we must begin with what I call data literacy. At the GCM second debate at United Nations in May 2017 in New York, when I was the thematic expert of the second debate, I pointed this out, that these politicians and our policymakers do not even know the difference between stock data of migrants and the flow data. Somebody even raised an alarming voice and said, look, the stock is increasing. I said, of course, the stock will be increasing, but we have to understand whether the flow is increasing or not. So that is very, very important. I think we need to start at the bottom, at the very simple things, to actually, make them understand, so that we have the data. We have a lot of data. Of course, we need more data, new data, But what are we doing with the old data? We just go on harping on the same thing again and again and again. That is where I think we need to be very critical. And I think this is a fantastic forum for us to make that. We have taken long, but I suppose we can begin there. Thank you very much.
Some absolutely relevant points there, Professor Kadria. Thank you for sharing your reflections and also just, bringing us back again into, the raison d'etre, I guess, to understand why is it that we, this objective sits where it is and the importance of it, but also understanding that, and I think I like the quote that you used on, lies, damned lies and statistics that, basically talks about, the persuading power of numbers. And also we know that they say facts don't lie. So on that note, I see some hands are raised. Laura Moreno, would you like to take the floor? I would just request that you are concise. If it's a question, if it's a comment, it's both welcome, but just that we're concise so we can cover everyone. Thank you.
Absolutely. This is a very short question for Sina. I'm just wondering how the UNHCR collects its data. I'm at the early stage of my research, and I'm a little bit concerned because the data that I have found on the UN, it's quite different from the official dates that I'm working on. So I'm wondering if you rely only on official data, or how is the process of your collecting? How does it work?
We will take a round of questions and then we will allow the panelists to share with us. Mr. Beise, please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. On one of my trips to Central Africa, I happened to meet some women that gave birth to children, and those children were not captured. There was no room for vaccination. So I'm trying to ask, what are we doing? What is the UN doing to capture such issues where children on the move, women and family on the move gave births? How do they capture that? How do they make healthcare accessible to those people? Thank you very much. That's what I want to know.
Thank you very much for that question. I guess that would be for Estrella. But Sina, you're also allowed to, share your reflections later. Joanne Gloria, please go ahead.
Thank you, our moderator. My name is Joan Gloria from Kenya. I appreciate being one of the students in this class. I want to say that I am learning a lot. Now, my question is, I'm interested on the for better lives for children on the move. I'm glad that children are also brought on board in the issue of migration. I only want to ask that how do this IDAC assist children that are left behind by their guardians or parents when they are going out to search for employment? Because I want to believe that in most cases here in Africa, when you are traveling outside in search of labor, you, at least because it's very much expensive, you rather go alone, first of all, leaving your family, including your children, who are very much vulnerable behind. So how do IDAC assist on those kind of children or that part of kids that are left behind? Or does it only work on data? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joanne Gloria. Several hands are coming up, so we would take those ones as well. And thank you also for the reflections and comments coming through. Indeed, it's a data extravaganza, as Dr. Zorenda has mentioned in the chat. Over to you, Salmanu Mohammed. You just need to unmute yourself, Salmanu.
Thank you. My name is Muhammad Tahir. Yeah.
You can go ahead, Mr. Tahir.
Oh, okay, thank you. I think my question goes to Sina and Estrella both. Since I am a refugee staying in Malaysia, it is for, and I am a community leader for Afghan refugees here in Malaysia. So almost thousands of families from Afghanistan are registered here in Malaysia. They are registered in UNHCR. But what I'm asking that in UNHCR in Malaysia, there are totally 180,000 refugees are registered. And Malaysia is not a signatory of 1951 convention, and children are not allowed to have are not allowed to have access to the education, and also adults are not allowed to work here. So Malaysia doesn't recognize officially refugees or migrants, and still they are dealing with refugees as undocumented migrants here in Malaysia. So, but on the other hand, refugees have to stay here in Malaysia more than 1 decade waiting for their resettlement. So the main point is here that these children who are not allowed to get education in Malaysia, as well as they cannot go to the other country for resettlement, since they need the special procedure of UNHCR for their resettlement. So here, who is the responsible of this loss and this deprivation? The children's are being deprived from their basic human right. That education is a basic right for all human beings, and especially for children, education is a fundamental right. As well as the adults that cannot work here, and they are not allowed to work in Malaysia. When they are working somewhere, they will be arrested and they will be put on the jail. So here, what is the UNHCR approach, and what is the other international organizations who are working for humanitarian assistance for refugees, asylum seekers, migrants? So these hundreds of refugees being in the countries like Malaysia, like Indonesia, like other countries who are not a signatory of 1951 convention, and the future of these refugees, hundreds and millions of these refugees are already destroyed. So who is the responsible here, and who will respond this question, and what will happen to those children who already lost their education time, and the age of education is already gone when they are resettled to another country. After 12 years, after 14 years, they are resettled when the education age is already gone. So in this midst,
Mr. Tahir, sorry to interject. If you could just come up to a wrap up to your question so we can take more questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that question. And Sina, up to you to see how you can handle that one in connection to data collection and how it impacts sort of on not just provision of services, access related issues for, forcibly displaced persons, as well as refugees, migrants, but also to see how that works in terms of some of the questions that have been raised on durable solutions. But up to you to see the remits in which you would like to answer that question. Thank you, Mr. Mohammed Tahir. Benedict Kuol, the floor is yours.
Yes, my apologies. Hello everyone. Thank you to the board of panelists. So I wanted to ask, I wanted to inquire if there's any recognized database, any globally recognized database that can be recommended to the members of the GCM global compact certification. as for many of us are currently maybe embarking on a future research. And also, yeah, I think that's enough. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. We'll take one more question, and so that we can allow our panelists to answer the brilliant questions that have been asked. Ahmed Murtala, the floor is yours for a minute. Just unmute your mic, Ahmed. All right. Okay, yes, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'm calling from Nigeria. I want to appreciate the focus Global Compact for Migration put on quality data. That's one of the objective number one. For the first time, I will see any international treaty focusing on data as number one objective. This is a good one. At the moment, there are about 322,000 refugees of Nigeria in Chad Republic, Nigeria, and Cameroon. And this data came up on the 28th of August in a national daily Punch, where the Minister for Humanitarian Affairs is emphasizing on the efforts of the federal government of Nigeria to repatriate these migrants back to their communities. And unfortunately, we are still having issues of crisis in these areas where these refugees were pushed to the neighboring countries. And the crisis is still ongoing. We're battling with the issues of Boko Haram, but until this moment, these communities are not yet safe. And the federal government is making a move to bring back these migrants to one big concern. The reason I'm raising this is just a background that how do we make and facilitate such information? It's a good one that one of the national daily is reporting on migrants. So my main question here is, how do we engage the media to report migration information on migration, especially the data, so that it can be so sensitive and it will generate certain political sentiments among the populations, so that we'll be able to engage. I think the civil society needs to come in here. And this is the first time I will see such a very sensitive data on the 28th of August. So thank you for the opportunity given to me to raise this question, please.
Ahmed, thank you for that very insightful question. Indeed, asking the question around the use, the dissemination of data, and here we're also talking about the use of mainstream media or social media, or however, sorry, I think we're getting, let me see if I can I mute you, Ahmed? Okay, yes, there we go. So thank you for that question. And I think in terms of dissemination and the role that the media would play in terms of the use of the data. So I guess also going back to the persuasive power and how it can also have negative consequences if not handled properly. We have some minutes. Let us give time to our panelists to respond. Sina, Estrella, who would like to go first? Estrella, the floor is yours. Go ahead. You just need to unmute.
Okay, sorry. I was looking for my unmute button. So thank you. Wow, those are very, very good questions, and indeed, very, very valid points for enlightenment. But I cannot. I will address some of them in group according to the issues that were raised. But let me begin by saying that one, IDAC is a platform which is intended to promote peer learning, co-creating solutions to a practical problem, which is filling in the data gaps on migrant and displaced children so that they are not invisible to policymakers and programmers. Okay, in that sense, we do not deal with the politics of the matter. And I think some of the questions that have been raised touch on the politics of why it's happening here and there, and how do you ensure that for example, the question of the media, it is a problem of I think it's Professor Binod who said data literacy. I think in my sense, we need to go beyond literacy, but promoting a data culture where we really look at when it comes to children, what's the best interest for the children, and then upholding the principle of doing no harm to children who are affected. Otherwise, they may be, even subject to further violations of their rights. So that's one point. And second, a question on the children left behind. Children left behind are actually considered in IDAC. We're trying to promote that they're part of this children in the MOVE subgroup, that we are able to count them. So as mentioned earlier, our work has just begun because this alliance was established March 2020, just before the COVID pandemic struck. And right now we have 4 working groups that will start working together, comprised of member states, the different stakeholders, civil society, academics, international organizations, and the governments, to try to find solutions. So let me just mention, because for you as students and participants of this course, I think it's important, by sharing this information, you please follow us. If we make the progress, maybe that's part of something that you can focus in the future. These 4 working groups will look at 1, building strengthening capacities for policymakers, 2, developing indicators and data for child-specific work, and 3, making available the data on internally displaced children, and 4, promoting collaboration and innovative methods of collecting data and sharing data, etc. So this work is about to begin. Now, you meant there's also a question about the stateless children. I believe this is covered. They are covered by the UNHCR. Sina, you can correct me, but I understand that there is also an expert group on statelessness estimates, interagency group. It's IGSE. So there is a group comprised of international organizations run by UNHCR, but UNICEF is a member of that, and they're looking at how to attend to the needs of those children that are affected. Because they're born in displacement situations, they do not have access to basic services such as health, COVID vaccination, and then education and job. So I cannot further comment on that, except to share that there are some mechanisms that are established, and we need to find out what they are doing on the ground. And then, yeah, I think, remind me, Patty, if there are some other questions that I need to comment on, but I think that's what I took note.
I think you have covered them adequately. There was a question earlier from Joanne Gloria, but I think that has also been already covered. And of course, just also some remarks that come to the appreciation at the fact that we've really also looked at the focus on children when we have asked you to join this panel, to really give us that eye. I think that has been well appreciated. Thank you very much, Estrella, for sharing those reflections. Sina, your response to the questions.
Thanks so much, and thanks, Estella, for already mentioning the EGRIS, the expert group on refugee and internally displaced person statistics. So happy to provide the link on that as well. Maybe quickly, because I know we're running out of time, to Laura's question on the different data sources that UNHCR uses and how we collect data and what we rely on. I think it's important maybe to make sure that comes across that, of course, I only touched upon one small part of data that we're sharing via the Microdata Library, which is microdata survey data. And that could be, as I already said, it could be post-distribution monitoring, where we monitor cash or other programs via a survey. It could be a more large-scale survey on refugees or IDPs or host communities, their perceptions, their employment trajectories, just also focusing on leaning back to one of the comments on Malaysia, we're actually doing a survey right now on employment perspectives of refugees in Malaysia. And so this is just one part of all the data that we're collecting. And then, of course, we do have registration data. And that's, of course, a very, very crucial part to UNHCR. I think that's briefly being mindful of the time, the responses, and feel free to reach out or also via email or in the chat if there's anything else.
Thank you, Sina, for sharing that. Actually, yes, this question that had been raised on the expat group, I think it would be great to just share in in the chat the comment, because particularly for those who may not be aware, and try to also understand the linkage, with the work on the expat group on refugee and internally displaced person statistics, which I think is would be very useful to understand. I see we still have a hand up. I don't know, Salmanu, Mohammed, if you're going to make it 30 seconds, you're welcome to take the floor. You need to unmute yourself. Mr. Mohammed, you need to unmute yourself. Okay, I'm not sure. We can see you, but we cannot hear you. Go ahead, please. Now we cannot hear you. Yeah, some days technology is also. Yes, there we go. Please go ahead.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. My name is Salmanu Muhammad from Wazobia International Migrant Children Foundation, Kano State of Nigeria. We really appreciate our presenters.
Mr. Mohammed, I apologize, but I think your audio is not good. Could you maybe turn off your video to see if we can improve your audio? If you turn off your video and just try with the audio, and yes, please go ahead.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. We really appreciate, we really appreciate the lectures for today. But my question is that, how can we generate the data? Because the data is very, very important. Which strategy can we follow to generate that data? Especially we are a civil society organization, and we are working on the OVC, that is Open and Vulnerable Children Communities. Please, which strategy can we follow to get those data, to generate the data? Thank you very much. And secondly, we need the slides of Sina presentation. Please, if she share us through our mail or our Gmail, please, we really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mohammed, for that question. I don't know, Estrella, if you wanted to take that, or Sina, in terms of, how does a civil society organization such as the one that Mr. Mohammed is with, what kind of strategy could they utilize for data?
Hadi, thanks. I was wondering if, because in the interest of time, maybe I could write to him or he could write to me and I could provide information, because I need to get more sense of what is the information that he would like to collect.
Absolutely. I thought I was going to make a blanket statement if I had said that, Estrella, but I'm glad that we are in the same wavelength of sort of thinking, what the use of data would be, and therefore I think carving out a path would be more interesting. And Mr. Mohammed, just feel free to draft out your question and we will forward it then to Estrella. And I know that we could have covered much more, but we are already beyond time and beyond the time that we had asked. Back again to where we started from, and maybe just giving our panelists, a word or two. Maybe, I don't know if there were some very last reflections, Estrella, Sina, that you wanted to share in this last moment before we wrap up and close. Sina, do you want to?
Just maybe ending with thank you very much for all your wonderful questions and for giving me the floor, and yeah, good luck with the program, and that's it from my side. Thank you.
So
Thank
Patty,
you,
from
Sina.
my,
I think yes, go ahead, Estrella.
sorry, I'm being mindful of the time. So from my end, I will also be sharing some useful links to learn more about IDAC's work, and also some past publications and what to watch out for that are upcoming activities. So also our contact details, so that in case you have any question at this stage, please try to feel free to write, and we will try to respond. And yeah, as you said, last minute reflection. I think this has been, I hope that this has been a useful session for the participants and the students. And I'm very grateful for giving me the opportunity to be part of this. As was mentioned by the different speakers as well and interveners, no one size fits all. We need a whole of government approach and a whole of society approach to really improving the data systems for migrants in general, and in particular for migrant and displaced children, subgroups of populations that are highly vulnerable. And we need to do that. It is not a sole responsibility of the government. Even civil society, even students like you can make a difference. Be vigilant, follow, check the data systems of your governments, and participate in relevant initiatives such as this, learning about how to improve data systems, and maybe aspire to become data analysts yourself so that you can contribute to solving some of the global problems facing the world. So thank you very much.
Estrella, thank you for that, and I think also indeed, an invitation or an inspiration out there to those aspiring to work under these areas. I think one of the reasons why the Global Compact on Migration Certificate really dives into each and every objective is to try and get into the granular issues. And I think that it has been, a fantastic platform. And thank you very much to Sina. Thank you very much, Estrella, and to Professor Rajan, who's not here with us, but has also requested that if they're very specific questions, you may feel free to send them. But you have really, many of us may not have had that 18 initiatives were lined out with their, various caveats, and I think we've already shared that in the classroom, and that is also available on the website. But sitting around and understanding what it means to actually go ahead and commit to this challenge, which is collecting and utilizing disaggregated data as a basis for evidence-based policies, certainly doesn't seem to be an easy job. And with that, just thanking you very much for the different reflections that you have shared, and thanking the students for and also the participants. I think we're over 250 of us gathered in this room, in this virtual space. Thank you for taking time to share reflections and questions, and thank you to the organizers as well, who and there's quite a number of people in the background ensuring that this is taking part. And I'm sure Estrella, Sina, and also Professor Rajan, it's not the first and last time that we will engage. As they say, that even though there are 23 objectives, it's as though they're all kind of intertwined. So many interfaces for us to see, and so many avenues for us to have an opportunity to meet. And with that, we have come to the end of our webinar for today. We have a GCM Objective number 2 next week, and please look out. And we don't have the poster to show for today, but we will be sharing that in the course of the week on the social media handles, as well as in the Google Classroom. Thank you to the partner noon or good evening for those in the Asia Pacific. Thank you. Take care and be safe. Bye-bye.